The afternoon sun blazed down on Naval Base Coronado as Captain Marcus Riley stepped out of his rental car. He wore simple civilian clothes, a plain polo shirt and khakis, with no visible signs of his military status. At 52, Riley had spent over 3 decades in the Navy, climbing through every rank with distinction. His graying hair and weathered face told stories of countless deployments and difficult decisions that came with command. Riley had come to Coronado for a quiet meeting with Admiral Thompson about a new joint operations initiative. The Admiral was running late, so Riley decided to grab coffee at the base exchange while he waited. As he walked across the compound, he noticed the intense training activity around him. Young sailors and SEALs moved with purpose, their dedication evident in every step. Near the main training facility, Riley paused to watch a group of SEALs practicing close-quarters combat drills. Their precision impressed him, reminding him of his own younger days in special operations before he moved into command roles. The Navy had changed a lot since his early years, but the commitment of these warriors remained the same. "Excuse me," a voice called out behind him. Riley turned to see a young SEAL approaching. The man was probably in his late 20s, with the confident bearing that came with elite training. His name tape read Johnson, and his uniform showed he held the rank of Petty Officer First Class. Johnson's muscles bulged under his training gear, and his intense stare suggested he was used to being the toughest person in most rooms. "You lost or something?" Johnson asked, looking Riley up and down with obvious skepticism. "This is a restricted training area." Riley smiled politely. "I'm waiting for someone, just watching the training while I have time." Johnson stepped closer, his chest puffed out slightly. "Waiting for someone? Who exactly? Because I don't see any reason a civilian should be hanging around here watching our operations." "I have clearance to be here," Riley said calmly, keeping his voice level and respectful. Johnson laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Clearance? Right. Look, old man, I don't know what kind of story you told the gate guards, but this isn't a tourist attraction. We're training here, real warriors doing real work." Other SEALs began gathering around, drawn by the confrontation. Riley could see some of them shifting uncomfortably, sensing their teammate was heading into dangerous territory. But Johnson seemed energized by the attention. "You know what?" Johnson continued, his voice getting louder. "I'm curious about something. You look like maybe you served once upon a time. Am I right? What was your rank when you got out? Because I'm betting it wasn't very impressive." Riley remained silent, simply watching the young SEAL with patient eyes. "Come on, don't be shy," Johnson pressed. "What's your rank?" "I'm a Petty Officer First Class in the United States Navy SEALs. That means something. That means I've earned the right to be here through blood, sweat, and tears. So what about you?" The other SEALs exchanged glances. A few of them recognized that Johnson was crossing lines of military courtesy, but none wanted to interfere with their teammate in front of an outsider. Riley took a deep breath. Throughout his career, he had dealt with young soldiers and sailors who confused confidence with arrogance. It usually came from good intentions, pride in their service and their units, but it could lead to embarrassing situations when not properly directed. "I appreciate your dedication to your service," Riley said diplomatically. "The SEALs have always been an impressive force." "That's not what I asked," Johnson shot back. "I asked about your rank. Or maybe you never served at all. Maybe you're just another wannabe who likes to hang around military bases, pretending to be something you're not." The accusation hung in the air like a challenge. Several more SEALs had joined the growing circle, and Riley could see that word of the confrontation was spreading. In the distance, he noticed a few officers beginning to take notice of the commotion. Johnson seemed to interpret Riley's continued calm as weakness. "Yeah, that's what I thought. Another fake. Another guy who wants to play dress-up and pretend he knows what real service looks like." Riley's jaw tightened slightly, but he maintained his composure. In his decades of service, He had learned that responding to disrespect with anger rarely produced positive outcomes. Better to let situations develop and deal with them appropriately when the time came. "Look," Johnson continued, "I don't know what you're doing here, but I think it's time for you to move along. This is a place for warriors, not for civilians playing make-believe." At that moment, Riley heard someone calling his name from across the compound. "Captain Riley, sir!" A young lieutenant was jogging toward them, slightly out of breath. As he got closer, Riley could see the recognition dawning in the faces of some of the SEALs. The lieutenant snapped to attention as he approached. "Captain Riley, sir. Admiral Thompson sends his apologies for running late. He's ready for your meeting now, sir." The lieutenant's formal military bearing and obvious respect for Riley created an immediate shift in the atmosphere. Johnson's confident expression faltered as he began to realize that he might have made a serious mistake. "Thank you, Lieutenant," Riley replied. "Please tell the Admiral I'll be right there." "Yes, sir." The lieutenant executed a crisp salute before hurrying back toward the administration building. Johnson stared at Riley with growing alarm. Captain was a significant rank, equivalent to a full colonel in other services. But the way the lieutenant had addressed Riley, with such clear deference and respect, suggested there might be more to the story. "Captain," Johnson said weakly. "You're a captain?" Riley nodded. "I am." The other SEALs began stepping back slightly, recognizing that their teammate had stumbled into a major breach of military protocol. Disrespecting a senior officer, especially one they didn't know, was a serious offense that could have significant consequences for Johnson's career. But you're not in uniform," Johnson stammered, grasping for some way to explain his behavior. "No, I'm not," Riley agreed. "I'm here for a civilian clothes meeting with Admiral Thompson about a joint operations initiative." Johnson's face went pale as the full weight of his mistake became clear. He had not only disrespected a senior officer, but he had done so publicly, in front of witnesses, while making accusations about the officer's service and character. Riley looked around at the assembled SEALs, all of whom were now standing at attention. These were good men. He could see that. They served with honor and dedication. Johnson's behavior was not representative of their character or their unit's standards. "Gentlemen," Riley said to the group, "thank you for your dedication to our country. The work you do matters, and I respect each of you for your service." Several of the SEALs nodded respectfully, though they remained tense about what might happen next to their teammate. Riley turned back to Johnson, who was now sweating despite the afternoon breeze. The young SEAL's earlier confidence had completely evaporated, replaced by the dawning realization that his military career might be in serious jeopardy. "Petty Officer Johnson," Riley said formally. "Yes, sir," Johnson replied, his voice barely above a whisper. Riley studied the young man for a moment, seeing past his mistake to the dedication that had brought him to the SEALs in the first place. Johnson was clearly a skilled warrior. You didn't make it through SEAL training without exceptional commitment and ability. His error had been one of judgment and protocol, not character. "Do you know why military courtesy exists?" Riley asked. "To maintain discipline and respect within the chain of command, sir," Johnson answered. "That's part of it," Riley agreed. "But it's also about something deeper. It's about recognizing that we're all part of something larger than ourselves. Every person in uniform, regardless of rank, has made sacrifices to serve. Respect isn't just about the rank someone wears. It's about honoring the commitment we all share." Johnson nodded, though he still looked terrified about the consequences of his actions. Riley continued, "I can see you're a dedicated SEAL. Your teammates respect you, and your training record probably speaks for itself. But today you forgot something important about what it means to be a professional warrior." "Yes, sir," Johnson replied. "I understand, sir." "Do you?" Riley asked. because understanding means more than just acknowledging your mistake. It means learning from it and ensuring it never happens again. As Riley spoke, he noticed Admiral Thompson approaching from the direction of the administration building. The Admiral was a tall, distinguished man with silver hair and the bearing of someone who had spent his entire adult life in service to his country. His expression suggested he had been briefed on the situation developing around the training area. "Gentlemen," Admiral Thompson called out as he approached, "is everything all right here?" The SEALs immediately snapped to attention, recognizing the Admiral's approach. Johnson's face somehow managed to get even paler as he realized that the base commander was now personally involved in his situation. "Admiral Thompson," Riley said with a slight smile, "I was just having a conversation with these fine SEALs about military courtesy and respect." Admiral Thompson nodded knowingly. As a senior officer, he had undoubtedly dealt with similar situations throughout his career. Young warriors with exceptional skills sometimes needed reminders about the importance of military bearing and protocol. "Petty Officer Johnson," Admiral Thompson said, looking directly at the young SEAL. "Yes, sir," Johnson replied, standing even straighter. "I trust you've learned something valuable today?" "Yes, sir. Absolutely, sir." Admiral Thompson studied Johnson for a moment, then nodded. "Good. See that you remember it." Riley watched the exchange with satisfaction. The Admiral clearly understood the educational value of the moment without needing to make it unnecessarily punitive. Johnson had learned his lesson, and that was what mattered most. "Now then," Admiral Thompson continued, "Captain Riley and I have important business to discuss. I trust all of you have training to get back to?" "Yes, sir," came the chorus of responses from the assembled SEALs. As the group began to disperse, Johnson remained standing at attention, clearly unsure whether he was dismissed or expected to say something more. Riley approached him one final time. "Petty Officer Johnson." "Yes, sir." "You asked about my rank," Riley said quietly, so only Johnson could hear. "The truth is, rank is just part of the story. What matters more is what we do with the responsibility we're given and how we treat the people around us. You're a SEAL. That means you're already among the best of the best. Make sure your behavior always reflects that standard." "Yes, sir." "Thank you, sir," Johnson replied, genuine gratitude evident in his voice. Riley nodded and walked away with Admiral Thompson, leaving Johnson to contemplate the lesson he had just received. As they headed toward the administration building, Riley reflected on the encounter. It reminded him of countless similar situations throughout his career. Moments when leadership meant choosing education over punishment, understanding over anger. 2 hours later, Captain Riley sat in Admiral Thompson's office reviewing briefing documents for their Joint Operations Initiative. The meeting had gone well. They were developing a new training program that would combine Navy SEAL expertise with conventional forces to create more flexible response capabilities. It was exactly the kind of forward-thinking approach Riley had spent years advocating for in his various command positions. "Excellent work on these preliminary proposals," Admiral Thompson said, closing his folder. "Your experience with multi-unit coordination really shows in the strategic framework." "Thank you, sir. I learned a lot during my time at CENTCOM about the challenges of integrating different types of units," Riley replied. Admiral Thompson leaned back in his chair and smiled. "Speaking of learning experiences, that was an interesting encounter with Petty Officer Johnson earlier." Riley chuckled. "He's a good kid, just needed a reminder about military courtesy." "Indeed. Though I suspect there's more to your background than Johnson realized when he was questioning your credentials." "Most people don't expect to meet a 4-star general in civilian clothes at a training facility," Riley said with a slight grin. Admiral Thompson nodded knowingly. Very few people outside the highest levels of military command were aware that Captain Marcus Riley was actually General Marcus Riley, a four-star general who often traveled under his permanent Navy rank for security and operational reasons. His work frequently involved classified operations and strategic planning that required a lower profile than his actual position would normally command. "Have you decided how you want to handle his unit, Commander?" Admiral Thompson asked. Riley considered the question. In military protocol, Johnson's behavior warranted formal discipline through his chain of command. Disrespecting a senior officer, especially a general officer, was a serious offense that could result in everything from reduction in rank to court-martial proceedings. "I think the learning experience was punishment enough," Riley said finally. "Johnson seems like the type who will remember this lesson for the rest of his career. Sometimes that's more valuable than formal discipline." "Generous of you, considering the circumstances." "We were all young and overconfident once," Riley replied. "The important thing is whether people learn and grow from their mistakes." As they finished their meeting, Admiral Thompson walked Riley toward the exit. Outside, they could see the SEAL teams continuing their training exercises. The afternoon sun was lower now, casting long shadows across the compound. "There is one thing I'd like to do before I leave," Riley said, watching the training activities. "What's that?" "I'd like to observe some of their advanced tactical exercises, Johnson's team specifically." Admiral Thompson raised an eyebrow. "Any particular reason?" Riley smiled. "Professional curiosity, and maybe an opportunity for some informal mentoring." 20 minutes later, Riley stood with Admiral Thompson at the edge of an advanced combat training course. Before them, a team of 12 SEALs was preparing for a complex hostage rescue simulation. The scenario involved multiple buildings, simulated civilians, and various tactical challenges designed to test their decision-making under pressure. Johnson was among the team members, and Riley could see that word of their earlier encounter had spread throughout the unit. The young SEAL kept glancing in their direction, clearly nervous about being observed by the officers he had disrespected earlier. "Attention!" called out Master Chief Peterson, the senior enlisted leader overseeing the exercise. The SEALs immediately formed ranks. "Gentlemen," Admiral Thompson announced, "we have some distinguished observers today. This is General Riley, who will be watching your exercise." Riley saw Johnson's eyes widen in shock. Several other team members also looked surprised, though they maintained their military bearing. "General?" Johnson whispered to the SEAL next to him, loud enough for Riley to hear. "That's right," Master Chief Peterson said firmly. "General Riley is here to observe your tactical proficiency. I expect you to demonstrate the excellence that defines this unit." "Yes, Master Chief," came the unified response. As the SEALs prepared for their exercise, Riley could see Johnson struggling to process the revelation about his true rank. A four-star general was among the highest-ranking officers in the entire military. Johnson had not just disrespected a senior officer, he had challenged and mocked one of the most senior officers in the armed forces. The exercise began with the team receiving their mission briefing. Intelligence indicated that terrorists had taken hostages in a compound consisting of 3 buildings. The SEALs had to neutralize the threats and rescue the civilians without causing unnecessary casualties. Riley watched with professional interest as the team moved through their planning phase. Their tactical knowledge was impressive, and their coordination showed the results of countless hours of training. Johnson, despite his obvious anxiety about being observed, demonstrated solid leadership skills and tactical awareness. "Team 1, you take the east building," Johnson directed. "Team 2, cover the west approach. Team 3, you're with me on the main building." The exercise unfolded with military precision. The SEALs moved through the compound using advanced tactical techniques, communicating through hand signals and radio protocols. Riley noted their attention to detail and their ability to adapt to changing circumstances as the simulation presented new challenges. During one particularly complex phase of the exercise, Johnson's team encountered an unexpected obstacle, a simulated improvised explosive device blocking their primary route to the hostages. Riley watched as Johnson quickly assessed the situation and developed an alternative approach. "Blue team, adjust your position to provide overwatch while we breach from the south entrance," Johnson radioed to his supporting elements. The solution was both creative and tactically sound, demonstrating exactly the kind of adaptive thinking that made SEALs so effective in real-world operations. Riley found himself genuinely impressed with Johnson's leadership under pressure. As the exercise continued, Riley noticed something else about Johnson's performance. Despite his earlier arrogance and lack of protocol, the young SEAL was clearly dedicated to his team and his mission. He took calculated risks to protect his teammates and showed genuine concern for the simulated civilians they were rescuing. The exercise concluded successfully, with all hostages rescued and all threats neutralized. The SEALs had performed with the excellence their reputation promised, demonstrating why they were considered among the world's elite special operations forces. Master Chief Peterson called the team together for a post-exercise debrief. "Outstanding work, gentlemen. Your tactical execution was textbook, and your adaptation to unexpected challenges showed real professionalism." Admiral Thompson stepped forward. "I agree completely. This was an impressive demonstration of your capabilities." Then Riley approached the group. The SEALs stood at attention, with Johnson looking particularly tense about what the general might say. "At ease," Riley said. "I want you to know that what I observed here today reinforces my confidence in the SEAL teams. Your technical proficiency, teamwork, and tactical judgment were all exceptional." He paused, looking around at each team member. "Special operations forces like yourselves represent the very best of our military. You're called upon to handle the most difficult and dangerous missions our country faces." Riley's gaze settled on Johnson. "Petty Officer Johnson, your leadership during the exercise was particularly noteworthy. Your solution to the IED obstacle showed exactly the kind of creative tactical thinking that separates good operators from great ones." Johnson's expression shifted from anxiety to surprise. "Thank you, sir. However," Riley continued, "I also want to address something important with all of you. Technical proficiency and tactical skill are just part of what makes a truly effective military unit. Character, integrity, and respect for others are equally important." The SEALs listened intently as Riley spoke about the broader responsibilities that came with their elite status. "You represent not just yourselves or even your unit," he said. "You represent the entire United States military. That means every interaction you have, whether with fellow service members, allies, or civilians, reflects on all of us." Riley looked directly at Johnson. "Earlier today, Petty Officer Johnson reminded me of an important lesson about assumptions and first impressions. We live in a time when military service takes many forms, and we can't always tell someone's background or experience just by looking at them." Johnson nodded, understanding the deeper message about his earlier behavior. "The mark of a true professional," Riley continued, "is someone who treats everyone with respect regardless of what they think they know about that person's rank or background. Military courtesy isn't just about following protocol. It's about maintaining the standards that make our military strong." Master Chief Peterson stepped forward. "General Riley, would you be willing to share some thoughts about leadership with the team?" Riley considered the request. He had spent decades learning about leadership through both success and failure, and these young SEALs represented the future of special operations. "Leadership in special operations is unique," Riley began. "You often work in small teams where every decision can mean the difference between mission success and failure, between life and death. Traditional military hierarchy still matters, but you also need to be able to think independently and adapt quickly to changing situations. He gestured toward the training facility where they had just completed their exercise. What I saw today demonstrated both sides of that equation. You followed orders and maintained discipline, but you also showed initiative when circumstances required it. Riley walked among the SEALs as he spoke, making eye contact with each of them. But here's what I want you to remember: the same qualities that make you effective in combat. Attention to detail, respect for your teammates, commitment to excellence. Those same qualities should guide your behavior in all aspects of your service. He stopped in front of Johnson. Petty Officer Johnson, you've learned something important today about the danger of making assumptions. But more importantly, you've shown that you can learn from your mistakes and continue to perform at a high level. Johnson straightened. Yes, sir. I won't forget today's lesson, sir. I believe that, Riley replied, and I expect you to share that lesson with others. Part of being a leader is helping your teammates avoid the mistakes you've made. As the informal leadership session continued, Riley found himself reflecting on his own career progression. He remembered his early days as a young officer, making similar mistakes and learning from senior leaders who took the time to mentor rather than simply punish. The afternoon was growing late, and Riley knew he needed to prepare for his return flight. But before leaving, he wanted to make sure his message had been clearly understood. Gentlemen, he said to the assembled SEALs, you are the tip of the spear for American military capability. That privilege comes with enormous responsibility. I have complete confidence in your ability to meet that responsibility with honor and distinction. The SEALs stood at attention as Riley prepared to leave. Johnson stepped forward slightly. General Riley, sir? Yes, Petty Officer Johnson? Sir, I want to apologize again for my behavior earlier, and I want to thank you for the way you handled the situation. A lot of officers would have made things much worse for me. Riley nodded approvingly. The fact that you recognize that shows growth, Johnson. Remember this feeling the next time you're in a position to choose between punishment and education when dealing with someone else's mistake. I will, sir, absolutely. As Riley walked back toward the administration building with Admiral Thompson, he felt satisfied with how the day had developed. What had started as a young SEAL's breach of protocol had become an opportunity for genuine learning and professional development. 6 months later, Petty Officer First Class Johnson sat in a briefing room at a forward operating base in the Middle East. His SEAL team had been deployed for 3 months, conducting counterterrorism operations in support of regional stability efforts. The work was demanding and dangerous, but exactly the kind of mission the SEALs had trained for throughout their careers. Johnson had been promoted to team leader for this deployment, a recognition of his tactical skills and leadership development. The encounter with General Riley at Coronado had become a defining moment in his career, though not in the way he had initially feared. Instead of destroying his reputation, the incident had become a catalyst for genuine personal growth. Johnson had spent considerable time reflecting on Riley's words about respect, assumptions, and military professionalism. Those lessons had influenced how he approached every interaction with fellow service members, regardless of their rank or background. All right, listen up, Johnson said to his team as they prepared for their afternoon brief. We've got a VIP visit today. Some bigwig from CENTCOM is coming to observe our operations. The team members groaned slightly. VIP visits usually meant extra paperwork, formal presentations, and disruption to their normal routine. Do we know who it is? Asked Petty Officer Martinez, the team's communications specialist. Negative. Just that it's someone important enough that the colonel wants everything perfect, Johnson replied. As the team prepared their briefing materials, Johnson thought about how differently he approached these situations now. 6 months ago, he would have been annoyed by the visit and probably would have made sarcastic comments about rear echelon officers coming to check on the real warriors. Now, He understood that senior leadership visits often provided valuable opportunities for learning and professional development. The transformation in his attitude hadn't happened overnight. In the weeks following the incident at Coronado, Johnson had sought out mentoring from Master Chief Peterson and other senior enlisted leaders. He had also begun studying military leadership principles, reading books recommended by his superiors about effective command and military professionalism. "Johnson," called out Lieutenant Commander Williams, the SEAL platoon leader, "the VIP just arrived. Bring your team to Conference Room Alpha for the briefing." "Roger that, sir." As Johnson led his team toward the conference room, he mentally reviewed their recent operations and prepared to present their activities in a clear, professional manner. Whatever senior officer was visiting, Johnson was determined to represent his team and his unit with the respect and professionalism that General Riley had emphasized. The team filed into the conference room and took their seats around a large table. Lieutenant Commander Williams stood at the front with several other officers Johnson didn't recognize. Then the door opened, and Johnson's breath caught in his throat. General Riley walked into the room, now wearing his Army combat uniform, with 4-star insignia clearly visible. Behind him was a small staff of colonels and lieutenant colonels who obviously formed his traveling party. Johnson felt his heart rate spike as memories of their encounter at Coronado flooded back. Riley's eyes met his across the room, and the general nodded slightly in recognition. "Gentlemen," Lieutenant Commander Williams announced, "this is General Riley, Commanding General of Special Operations Command Central. He's here to observe our current operations and assess our effectiveness in the theater." The SEALs stood at attention as General Riley approached the briefing table. Johnson noted that the general carried himself with the same calm confidence he had displayed at Coronado, showing no sign of superiority or arrogance despite his elevated position. "At ease," Riley said. "Please have a seat. I'm here to learn from you, not to inspect you." As the formal briefing began, Johnson presented his team's recent operations with clarity and precision. They had successfully completed 7 high-value target missions, rescued 4 hostages, and gathered significant intelligence about terrorist networks operating in the region. Riley listened intently, asking thoughtful questions about tactics, coordination with local forces, and lessons learned from their operations. Johnson was impressed by the depth of the general's understanding of special operations challenges and his genuine interest in the details of their work. "Petty Officer Johnson," Riley said during a break in the briefing, "your team's performance statistics are impressive. 7 successful HVT operations with no friendly casualties and minimal collateral damage." "Thank you, sir. My team is exceptional." Riley smiled. "Your team? Yes, but leadership matters too. How would you assess your own development as a team leader?" The question caught Johnson off guard. He hadn't expected such a direct inquiry about his personal growth, especially from someone who had witnessed his earlier lack of military bearing. "Sir, I've learned a great deal about leadership since my promotion," Johnson said carefully. "Particularly about the importance of treating everyone with respect and not making assumptions about people based on first impressions." Several team members looked curious about the exchange, sensing some history between Johnson and the general that they weren't aware of. Riley nodded approvingly. "That's an important lesson. Have you had opportunities to apply it?" Johnson thought about several recent incidents where he had consciously chosen to show respect and professionalism, even when his initial impulses suggested otherwise. There had been interactions with support personnel, local military allies, and even civilian contractors, where his improved approach had led to better outcomes. "Yes, sir, multiple times. It's made me a more effective leader and helped my team work better with other units." "Can you give me an example?" Johnson considered which story would best illustrate his point. 2 weeks ago, we were working with a local military unit on a joint operation. Their commander seemed very young and inexperienced to me. My first instinct was to question his competence and maybe suggest we handle things ourselves. Riley listened with obvious interest as Johnson continued. But I remembered something about not making assumptions based on appearances. So instead, I took time to listen to his briefing and understand his perspective. It turned out he had extensive local knowledge that was crucial to mission success. His insights about enemy movement patterns probably saved American lives. Outstanding, Riley said. That's exactly the kind of adaptive leadership our forces need. Lieutenant Commander Williams looked pleased with Johnson's response, clearly proud of his team leader's development. After the formal briefing concluded, Riley asked to speak with Johnson privately. The other SEALs filed out of the conference room, leaving the two of them alone. "Sit down, Johnson," Riley said, taking a seat across from him at the briefing table. "Yes, sir. I have to tell you, I'm impressed with your growth over the past 6 months. Your unit commander's reports about your leadership have been exceptional." Johnson felt a surge of pride, but also gratitude toward the general who could have destroyed his career, but instead had chosen to educate him. "Sir, I owe you a debt for how you handled our encounter at Coronado. A lot of officers would have ended my career that day." Riley shook his head. "You don't owe me anything. You took responsibility for your mistake and learned from it. That's what professionals do. Still, sir, your approach made all the difference. I've been thinking about it a lot during this deployment." "Tell me about that." Johnson gathered his thoughts. "I realized that day that I had confused confidence with arrogance. I thought being a SEAL meant I was automatically better than everyone else instead of recognizing that it meant I had a responsibility to serve with honor." Riley leaned forward, clearly interested in Johnson's reflection. "I also learned that respect isn't something you give people based on what you think you know about them," Johnson continued. "It's something you give people because of what you represent and the standards you're committed to upholding." "That's a sophisticated understanding of military professionalism," Riley observed. "Have you been sharing these insights with your teammates?" "Yes, sir. Whenever I see someone making the same kind of mistakes I made, I try to help them understand the bigger picture." Riley smiled. "Leadership through mentoring rather than punishment." "Exactly what you demonstrated with me, sir." The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, with Riley sharing some of his own experiences about leadership development and the mistakes he had made early in his career. Johnson was struck by the general's humility and willingness to acknowledge his own learning curve. "Before I leave," Riley said, "I want you to know that you're being considered for promotion to Chief Petty Officer. Your performance as a team leader has been exemplary." Johnson's eyes widened. Chief Petty Officer was a significant advancement that would bring new responsibilities and opportunities. "Sir, I'm honored. But I have to ask, does this have anything to do with our previous encounter?" Riley laughed. "Absolutely not. In fact, if anything, that incident could have hurt your chances if you hadn't learned from it so effectively. This recommendation is based purely on your performance as a leader and operator." "Thank you, sir." As Riley prepared to leave for his next stop, he paused at the conference room door. "Johnson, one final thought. The lesson you learned about not making assumptions, that applies to more than just military courtesy. It applies to understanding your enemies, working with allies, and leading your own people. Keep developing that mindset." "I will, sir." After Riley left, Johnson sat alone in the conference room for several minutes, processing the conversation. The encounter at Coronado, which had seemed like such a disaster at the time, had ultimately become one of the most valuable experiences of his military career. His teammates gradually filtered back into the room, curious about his private discussion with the general. "What was that all about?" Martinez asked. Johnson considered how to explain without going into unnecessary detail about his past mistakes. "The general and I had met before," he said simply. "He was checking on my development as a leader." "Must have been a good meeting," observed Petty Officer Davis. "You look like someone who just got some very good news." Johnson smiled. Yeah, it was a good meeting, and it reminded me of some important lessons about leadership and respect that I want to make sure we all understand. Over the next hour, Johnson led an informal discussion with his team about military professionalism, the importance of treating everyone with respect, and the danger of making assumptions about people based on limited information. He shared some general principles from his experience without revealing the embarrassing details of his encounter with Riley. The team responded positively to the discussion, with several members sharing their own experiences about times when showing respect and professionalism had led to better outcomes than their initial impulses would have produced. As the day concluded, Johnson reflected on how dramatically his perspective had changed since that afternoon at Coronado. The arrogant young SEAL who had challenged an unknown civilian had evolved into a leader who understood that true strength came from character and professionalism, not just tactical skill. That evening, Johnson wrote an email to Master Chief Peterson back at Coronado, updating him on the deployment and thanking him for his mentoring after the Riley incident. He also mentioned that he was being considered for promotion and wanted to ensure he was prepared for the additional responsibilities that would come with advancement. The response came back within hours, congratulating Johnson on his growth and offering continued support for his development. Peterson also mentioned that General Riley had personally commended Johnson's progress to Admiral Thompson, noting it as an example of how proper mentoring could transform a potentially career-ending mistake into a catalyst for professional growth. As Johnson prepared for sleep in his quarters, he thought about the lessons he would carry forward from this experience. Military service was about more than individual achievement or even unit success. It was about being part of something larger than yourself and maintaining standards that honored everyone who had served before and would serve in the future. The encounter with General Riley had taught him that true military bearing meant treating everyone with respect, regardless of circumstances. It meant acknowledging mistakes and learning from them rather than making excuses. And it meant understanding that leadership was ultimately about developing others, not just demonstrating your own capabilities. 6 months earlier, Johnson had been a skilled operator with poor judgment about military courtesy and respect. Now, he was developing into the kind of leader who could help others avoid the same mistakes while building teams that performed with both technical excellence and professional integrity. The transformation hadn't been easy, but it had been worth every moment of reflection and growth. As he drifted off to sleep, Johnson felt grateful for the general who had chosen education over punishment and set him on a path toward becoming the kind of leader the SEALs needed. In Washington, D.C., General Riley was completing his own after-action report from the theater visit. His assessment of Special Operations effectiveness was positive, and he made particular note of outstanding leadership development within the SEAL teams. Years of experience had taught Riley that the military's greatest strength wasn't its technology or tactics, but its people. Developing those people, helping them learn from their mistakes and grow into effective leaders, was one of the most important responsibilities of senior command. The encounter with Johnson at Coronado had reminded Riley of his own early mistakes and the patient mentoring he had received from senior officers. That tradition of development and growth was what kept the military strong across generations of service members. As he finished his report, Riley smiled slightly, thinking about the young SEAL who had challenged his credentials and then grown into an exceptional team leader. It was exactly the kind of transformation that made a career in military service worthwhile.